Varric Amsel stood at the edge of the Lunar Academy's main entrance, which, in his humble opinion, looked like a plumbing problem had thrown up on an architect's desk. He took a deep breath, feeling the recycled air do absolutely nothing for his nerves. "Welcome to Selenes, where dreams go to die," he muttered to himself, adjusting the strap of his satchel. His reflection in the polished metal door smirked back at him, and he couldn't help but chuckle. As the door slid open with a sound that could only be described as a cat being slowly crushed, Varric was greeted by the sight of students, all shapes and shades of the galaxy. The walls were cold, sterile, and did nothing to hide the oppressive atmosphere. A pair of towering cavalry guards stood at the entrance, looking like they had a permanent appointment with unpleasantness. "Morning, gentlemen, or is it afternoon? Hard to tell with no bloody sun," Varric quipped as he walked past them, receiving nothing but stony silence in return. "Mr. Amsel, I presume," a voice like gravel being ground underfoot called out. Varric turned to see a slender figure with skin the color of a jaundiced lemon. "Yeah, that's me, or at least that's what my ID says," Varric replied, offering a hand. "Call me Varric. I find Mr. Amsel makes me sound like I'm supposed to be respectable." The figure ignored the handshake, instead flicking a fob at a nearby panel. "I'm Principal Thorax. You're here to teach history to our more impressionable minds. Best not give them any ideas." "Ideas, me? Never," Varric said, trying to keep a straight face. "I'm just here to educate these fine young aliens about the wonders of human history. You know, wars, revolutions, the occasional genocide. Light stuff." Thorax's eyes narrowed to slits, which Varric assumed was a bad sign. "Just remember why you're here, human. Our students are our future leaders. We wouldn't want their minds tainted with thoughts of insubordination or, what's the Earth term, freedom." Varric shrugged. "Freedom's overrated, but I'll do my best to keep them on the straight and narrow. Cross my heart and hope to. Well, you know." With that, Varric followed Thorax down a corridor that somehow managed to look even more drab than the entrance. The walls were lined with posters, motivational slogans in languages Varric didn't recognize. Most of them probably said something like, "Obey or else." They stopped outside a classroom door. It was labeled in blocky script that Varric had learned to loathe. "Welcome to your new home," Thorax said with a wave. "Try not to break anything." Varric entered the room, taking in the rows of desks filled with a kaleidoscope of young aliens, each one more bizarre than the last. He dropped his satchel onto the desk with a thud, earning a collective turn of heads. "Good morning, class," Varric began, trying to sound enthusiastic. "I'm your new history teacher, Varric Amsel. Or that human guy, if you prefer. I answer to both." A tentacled student raised what Varric assumed was an arm. "Are you going to teach us about the Great Collapse?" it asked, voice a high-pitched whine. Varric grinned. "Oh, absolutely. We'll cover all the highlights. Mad leaders, doomed societies, the usual fun stuff. But let's start with something a bit more rebellious. Like the time humans decided they didn't like having a king tell them what to do." A ripple of interest passed through the class. Varric leaned back against his desk, feeling the groove of his old classroom persona slip easily into place. "You know, history has a funny way of repeating itself, especially when people get fed up with being told what they can and can't do." "Sound familiar?" The students exchanged glances, some nodding, others staring with a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Don't worry," Varric continued, winking. "By the time I'm done with you lot, oppression will be just another word you'll want to throw in the trash." As the lesson went on, Varric noticed the guards peeking through the door window, their expressions as friendly as a pit of vipers. He made sure his words were just vague enough to avoid overt suspicion, but he could see the seeds being planted. When the bell finally rang, Varric watched the students file out, heads buzzing with new ideas, dangerous ideas. He couldn't help but feel a spark of hope, or was it mischief? Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Packing his things, Varric caught sight of a student lingering near the door, a scrawny thing with eyes too big for its head. "Mr. Amsel," it said, voice barely above a whisper. Do you think we could ever, you know, be free? Varric paused, considering his words carefully. Freedom's a tricky thing, he finally said. But history has a funny way of showing that where there's a will, there's usually a way. The student nodded, a small smile breaking through its nervous exterior. Thanks, it said before scurrying out. Alone in the classroom, Varric leaned back in his chair, glancing at the barren ceiling. Well, Varric, he mused to himself, looks like you've got yourself in deep this time. Just then the comm unit on his desk crackled to life. Mr. Amsel, report to the principal's office immediately, Thorax's voice commanded, dripping with the promise of unpleasantness. Varric sighed, standing up and grabbing his satchel. And so it begins, he muttered, heading out the door with a grin. The first day of the rest of my wonderfully doomed life. Varric Amsel moseyed through the labyrinthine halls of Selenes, trying to ignore the feeling that the walls were closing in, like a cheap horror flick set in a space submarine. With each turn, he felt the oppressive air of bureaucracy thickening, and he couldn't tell if his breathing got heavier from the recycled air or the impending doom spelled by Principal Thorax's summons. Probably both. And this, he muttered to himself, is why I didn't take that job on Mars. Too much sand, not enough oxygen, and nowhere near as much existential dread. As he rounded a corner, he spotted two of his students, Johnny and Clyra, loitering near the entrance to the principal's office. Johnny, with her vibrant, insect-like eyes, buzzed about with a nervous energy that made Varric anxious just watching her. Clyra was the complete opposite, her demeanor as calm and inscrutable as a poker-faced android. If she were any more laid-back, Varric suspected she'd tip over. "Hey, Mr. Amsel," Johnny chirped, her voice like nails on a chalkboard inside his skull. "You get called to the office, too." "Yeah, it seems I've been a very naughty boy," Varric replied with a grin that was more grimace. "What about you two?" "Planning a jailbreak." Clyra's eyes flicked towards the office door, her voice barely a whisper. "We're curious. You said history repeats, right? That power always tends to overextend itself." "Sure did," Varric said, crossing his arms. "Didn't expect anyone was listening, though." Johnny's antennae twitched, perhaps the insect equivalent of a shrug. "We're always listening, so can it change?" "Can we change it?" Varric paused, considering the two alien students before him. They were like kittens discovering the world outside the litter box for the first time. Adorable, curious, and about to get into a world of trouble. That's the million-credit question, isn't it? Can you change the system without becoming what you hate? I'd love to give you a nice, happy answer, but I'd hate to lie to such innocent faces. Clyra's lips curled into the ghost of a smile. "Innocent? That's generous." Johnny nodded, her enthusiasm undeterred. "You've been talking about all these revolutions. We want to know more." Varric sighed, momentarily forgetting his looming meeting with Thorax. "Look, history's littered with the bones of those who try to change things. Most of them ended up as cautionary tales with particularly grim endings, but the ones who made it, well, they had something extra." "Like what?" Johnny asked, eyes wide enough to fit small planets. "Luck mostly," Varric said with a shrug, "and a whole lot of gall." Before either student could ask more, the door to Principal Thorax's office slid open with a hiss. Thorax stood there, all jaundiced skin and poorly concealed disdain. "Mr. Amsel inside, now." "Well, duty calls," Varric said to the students, shooting them a wink. "Remember, rebellion's great until you're the one wearing the crown." Inside the office, Thorax moved behind his desk like a predator circling its prey. "Mr. Amsel," he began, his voice as pleasant as gravel in a blender. "Your teaching methods have sparked interest." "Interest, huh?" Varric settled into the chair opposite Thorax, trying to find a position that didn't scream guilty as charged. "That's the nicest thing anyone said about me all week." Thorax's fob clicked against the desk, a sound that managed to be both simple and ominous. "Interest in ideas that are not conducive to our Academy's values." "Well, I always knew I was bad with values," Varric replied. "Just ask my ex-wife." Thorax's eyes narrowed to slits. "Cut the humor, Amsel. You're here to teach history, not incite rebellion." "Believe me, Inciting rebellion wasn't exactly on my to-do list. Right between get coffee and don't die alone, Thorax leaned forward, his lemony skin almost glowing under the harsh lights. You're treading a very thin line, human. Continue this path and you'll find yourself on the wrong side of it. Varric held up his hands in mock surrender. Look, I'm just telling them how it went down on old Earth. You can't make history boring without a chemical lobotomy. Consider this a warning, Thorax said, leaning back. Tread carefully. There are those who would not take kindly to your approach. Varric nodded, feeling the weight of the warning settle in his gut like a lead sandwich. Message received, Principal, loud and clear. The meeting concluded with no further pleasantries, which suited Varric just fine. As he exited, he couldn't help but overhear the whispers of Thorax's assistant discussing next week's mandatory morale seminar. He grimaced. Nothing killed morale quite like mandatory fun. Out in the hallway, he found Johnny and Clyra still lingering, much to his surprise. Still here. What do you expect, a public flogging? Johnny beamed, antennae quivering with excitement. Thought you might need rescuing. Varric chuckled despite himself. Thanks for the concern, but I think it's me who should be worried about you too, Clyra shrugged, a movement so subtle it was practically an afterthought. We want to learn more about breaking cycles. And here I thought I was the bad influence, Varric said, shaking his head. Look, I'll teach you all I can in class, but be careful where you tread. This place isn't exactly known for encouraging free thought. Johnny and Clyra shared a look that spoke volumes, a silent conversation that Varric could only guess at. We understand, Clyra finally said. We'll be careful. Good, Varric replied, giving them a nod. Now go. Before Thorax decides to turn his jaundiced wrath on you. As the two students disappeared down the corridor, Varric felt a strange mix of pride and dread churning in his gut. He'd come to this rock with no more ambition than getting through the day with his soul intact, and suddenly he found himself at the edge of something much larger. The thought was as invigorating as it was terrifying. With a sigh, he made his way back to his classroom, wondering just how far down the rabbit hole he'd be willing to go. As he reached his desk, he found a small note taped to the surface, a crude drawing of a crown and a noose. Below it was scrawled in messy alien script, "Freedom isn't free." Varric stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it into his satchel. Well, ain't that the truth, he muttered to himself. Just then a shadow moved at the edge of his vision. He turned to see a figure lurking by the door, a silhouette draped in shadows like an old cloak. The figure stepped forward, revealing a face lined with the kind of experience you only get from dancing with danger and losing a few toes. Varric Amsel, the figure asked, voice low and measured. That's me. And you are, the figure smirked, a flash of teeth that seemed more predatory than friendly. Call me Jerk, words out, you're stirring the pot. Words out. Did someone put it on the Galactic bulletin board? Varric crossed his arms, trying to gauge whether this newcomer was friend or foe. Something like that, Jerk said. Just thought you'd want to know you're not alone in this. There are others who believe change is possible. And they're watching. Watching, huh? Somehow that's not as comforting as you probably think. Jerk chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling downhill. I'm not here to comfort you, Varric. I'm here to warn you, you're treading dangerous waters. Yeah, I've heard that song a few times today. Anything else you want to add to the chorus? Jerk's expression turned serious, the kind of serious that comes with a lifetime of regrets. Just remember, your words have power. Use them wisely. Not everyone in this academy is as open-minded as your little friends. I'm aware, Varric replied, feeling the weight of Jerk's gaze. But thanks for the warning. I'll keep it in mind. With a nod, Jerk turned and left, disappearing down the corridor as quickly as he'd appeared. Varric watched him go, bemused and wary. It seemed his little history lessons were attracting attention from all corners, like ants to spilled sugar. Leaning back in his chair, Varric let out a long, weary sigh. What the hell have you gotten yourself into, Amsel? But despite the looming threats and the shadowy warnings, he couldn't shake the sense of purpose that had taken root. Teaching history was one thing, changing it was something else entirely. Yet here he was, on a barren moon with the power to sow the seeds of rebellion. As the day wore on, Varric couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement. He'd come to Selenes to teach history but might just end up making some of his own. He had a feeling things were about to get interesting, or more likely, disastrously complicated. Either way, it was bound to be a hell of a ride. Varric Amsel stood in front of his horde of misfits, also known as the history class, feeling like a gladiator about to face the lions. Except these lions were armed with a dangerous combination of curiosity and desperation, which was far worse. The air in the room buzzed with an energy that was as much a product of youthful rebellion as it was of impending chaos. "So," he began, scanning the room for any signs of hidden cameras or controlled drones, standard issue in this pit of authoritarianism. "Who here can tell me what happens when you poke a sleeping bear with a stick?" Johnny's hand shot up like she was on a caffeine drip. "It wakes up and eats you." "Correct. And what if that bear is a bloated, bureaucratic regime?" "Silence. The kind you could cut with a knife and serve at a dinner party for awkward silences." Clyra finally broke it with her ever-calm demeanor. "It tries to squash you before you can poke again." "Exactly. But here's the kicker." Varric leaned back against his desk, which creaked ominously. "The bear is slow, and while it's fumbling around trying to squash you, you have a chance to do something clever." Johnny's antennae twitched with excitement. "Like what?" "Like making sure it's too dizzy to stand." Varric glanced around the room, noticing the eager eyes locked on him, as if they were expecting a miracle in a lecture. "And that, my friends, is called subversion." Just as he was about to elaborate, the classroom door slid open with the subtlety of a bomb blast. In walked a Calsry guard, helmet glinting under the fluorescent lights, his demeanor as friendly as a pit viper. "Mr. Amsel," the guard grunted. "Principal Thorax requires your presence." Varric sighed, rolling his eyes at the guard. "Of course he does." "Try not to start a revolution while I'm gone, okay?" he said to the students, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I know how much you all love overthrowing oppressive regimes on Tuesdays." Johnny and Clyra shared a look that was anything but innocent. As Varric exited the room, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of apprehension. The principal's office was becoming a second home, and like most second homes, it was one he couldn't afford. The path to Thorax's office felt increasingly labyrinthine, like a metaphorical maze designed to trap ill-fated educators. By the time he reached the door, flanked by the ever-vigilant guards, Varric was ready for whatever verbal cudgeling awaited. Principal Thorax was, unsurprisingly, as cheerful as a funeral director at a convention. "Mr. Amsel," he said, his voice like gravel wrapped in disdain, "it has come to my attention that your influence is spreading beyond the classroom." Varric shrugged, adopting the innocent look that had once gotten him out of a speeding ticket on Mars. "Guess I'm just that charming." Thorax fixed him with a stare that could have melted steel. "Charming is not the word I would use. We've received reports of unorthodox gatherings among the students. They're beginning to question the system." "Well, if you don't want people questioning things, maybe don't make everything so damn questionable," Varric replied, crossing his arms and mentally bracing for impact. "This is not a joking matter, Mr. Amsel," Thorax snapped, his fob thumping against the desk like a judge's gavel. "Do you understand the consequences of inciting insubordination?" "I'm just a history teacher," Varric said, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Not a revolutionary leader." "Be that as it may, you will cease this behavior immediately," Thorax warned, leaning forward to emphasize each syllable with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Or we will have to take action." Varric nodded, the weight of the threat settling over him like a particularly itchy blanket. "Got it. No more waking the bear." As Varric left the office, he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching his every move. The corridors were filled with the ghosts of past conversations, echoes of dissent that seemed to follow him like a bad smell. Returning to his classroom, Varric found it abuzz with a quiet anticipation. The students were waiting, not for facts or dates, but for something more potent. Ideas, perhaps, or ammunition depending on how things played out. "So, what's the verdict?" Johnny asked, her voice tinged with hope or fear, maybe both. "Same old song and dance," Varric replied, taking his place at the front of the room. "Thorax wants to make sure I'm not starting any revolutions. Apparently, you guys aren't supposed to think for yourselves." Clara's expression remained inscrutable, but Varric caught a flicker of something behind her eyes, determination maybe. "And are you?" she asked softly. "Starting revolutions?" "Nah," Varric said, winking. "Just teaching history." Funny how the two seemed to go hand in hand, though. Later, as the students filed out, Johnny lingered. "Mr. Amsel," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There's a meeting tonight. Some of the others want to discuss the things we've learned." Varric rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of a headache that was quickly becoming his constant companion. "Be careful, Johnny. This place isn't exactly forgiving." She nodded, her eyes wide with the kind of youthful idealism that made Varric feel both proud and terrified. "I know, but if we don't do something, who will? Just make sure you don't end up on the wrong side of a lockup," Varric replied, doing his best to sound pragmatic rather than paranoid. "And if you need help, you know where to find me." As Johnny left, Varric slumped into his chair, staring at the ceiling as if it held the answers to all his problems. What had started as a simple teaching gig was spiraling into something far more dangerous. Each step deeper into this mess felt like an invitation to disaster, but there was no backing out now. That evening, Varric found himself wandering the corridors of Selenes, each step echoing with a sense of foreboding. He'd chosen to take the long way back to his quarters, ostensibly to clear his head, but really to avoid the oppressive silence of his room. The academy seemed even more stifling at night, a concrete tomb lit by flickering lights and patrolled by guards who looked like they'd been carved from the same granite. Turning a corner, he spotted a group of students huddled together, tucked away in an alcove that offered a modicum of privacy. Among them were Johnny and Clara, their faces intent and animated. Varric hesitated, torn between his responsibilities as an educator and the instinct to let them come to their own conclusions. Just as he was about to turn away, the low hum of conversation was shattered by the clanking approach of a cavalry patrol. The group scattered like roaches in a kitchen, disappearing into the shadows with practiced ease. Varric pressed himself against the wall, heart pounding, until the guards passed, their footsteps fading into the distance. With the coast clear, Varric approached the alcove, finding it deserted except for a slip of paper, hastily dropped in the student's rush to evade detection. He picked it up, noting the scrawled handwriting, a list of names, students who were rallying behind the cause of change. "Guess history's not the only thing repeating itself," he muttered, tucking the paper into his pocket with a mix of dread and resolve. By the time he reached his room, Varric had come to a decision. If history was going to repeat itself, then maybe, just maybe, he could help write a better ending. But he had to be smarter than the system, more cunning than the bear that slept beneath Selenes's veneer of order. He spent the next few hours piecing together a plan, something that would allow the students to meet, learn, and strategize without drawing the ire of Thorax and his cronies. It was a delicate balance, like juggling knives over a pit of lava, but it was a start. The following day, Varric sauntered into class with a newfound sense of purpose. He laid out his plan with the subtlety of a magician pulling rabbits from hats, weaving lessons in history with strategies for subversion, all while maintaining the facade of a typical, albeit slightly odd, educational session. "Remember," he said, casting a meaningful glance at Johnny and Clara, "the best way to change the system is to make it think it's changing itself, like a self-cleaning oven. Only, less flammable." His students responded with nods of understanding, catching onto the undercurrent of his words. There was a thrill in their expressions, a promise of things to come. As the class ended and the students filed out, Varric lingered, watching with a blend of pride and trepidation. He was playing with fire, But in a place as cold and unyielding as Selene's, maybe a little heat was exactly what they needed. The real challenge would be keeping the flames from burning everything down, a task that required more than just luck and gall. It required a level of cunning that Varric wasn't entirely sure he possessed, but he was willing to find out. Because, at the end of the day, history wasn't just a collection of facts and dates. It was the story of people who dared to push against the walls of their reality, who fought to carve out a place where they could be free. And if he was going to help his students learn that lesson, he'd have to be ready to do the same. As he locked up the classroom, Varric couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Whether it would be the dawn of a new era or the final nail in his coffin was anyone's guess. But one thing was certain, it was going to be a hell of a ride. As Varric Amsel trudged back to his classroom the next day, he was greeted by the sight of Principal Thorax's latest attempt at making the academy even less inviting. A new batch of surveillance drones buzzing overhead like flies attracted to a particularly rancid dumpster. These drones were sleeker, shinier, and about as welcome as a tax audit. "Ah, the little spies have a makeover," Varric muttered under his breath, resisting the urge to flip them the bird. Because nothing says we trust you like a floating Orwellian nightmare, right? The students were already gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and resignation. Johnny's antennae twitched like she was tuned into a frequency only she could hear, while Clyra sat with the calm of someone who'd seen worse but wasn't keen on seeing it again. "So, what's the new policy? They gonna start reading our minds?" Johnny asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Not yet," Varric replied. "But give them time. For now, they're just upping the ante on genetic monitoring." Apparently, rebellious thoughts have a DNA marker. Who knew? The class erupted into a cacophony of whispers, disbelief mingling with the faint thrill of rebellion. Varric let them buzz for a moment, watching their reactions. It was like watching a pot of water just before it boiled over, bubbles and heat but no steam. Yet, "All right, settle down," he said, holding up his hands. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. The powers that be think they can keep us in line with a few genetic scans, but we humans have a little something they always underestimate. Stubbornness," Clyra suggested, arching an eyebrow. "Adaptability," Varric corrected, though he couldn't help but smile at her suggestion. "We've survived everything from ice ages to global warming, genocidal maniacs to, well, whatever this is. We're not about to let a few drones and DNA tests stop us." "But how?" Johnny asked, a hint of eagerness in her voice. "How do we adapt to this?" Varric leaned in, lowering his voice. "By being smarter than the system. We play by their rules just long enough to break them." His plan was simple, at least in theory. They'd use the Academy's own tech against it. Genetic monitoring relied on established patterns, predictable like everything else in Thorax's regime. So they'd create new patterns, confuse the sensors, and mislead the watchers. "The key," Varric continued, "is in our biology. Human DNA is like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. We can change, evolve. It's time to exploit that." The students looked at him as if he were proposing a high-stakes heist, which wasn't too far from the truth. The gamble lay in using their own genetic chaos to their advantage. "But what if it fails?" Clyra asked, her voice quieter now, as if they were already being listened to, which they probably were. "I don't have all the answers," Varric admitted, shrugging. "But sitting around worrying about the what-ifs has never solved anything. We've got to act, even if it means making it up as we go." "Sounds dangerous," Johnny said, though her eyes were alight with something that looked suspiciously like hope, or maybe just the allure of a challenge. "Life is dangerous," Varric replied, lifting his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "But doing nothing is riskier. Besides, if history's taught us anything, it's that the most daring plans often come from the most desperate times." The bell rang, signaling the end of the period. The students gathered their things, a mixture of determination and apprehension etched across their faces. Varric watched them leave, each step they took echoing with the potential for change. In the days that followed, the academy tightened its grip. The drones were joined by guards whose faces were as friendly as a hangover. Genetic tests became a regular feature, as unavoidable as Thorax's smirk during staff meetings. Varric did his best to keep the students focused, to maintain the illusion of normalcy while they worked on their plan. It wasn't easy, like threading a needle during an earthquake, but they persevered. One afternoon, as Varric was preparing to leave the classroom, Clyra approached him. Her typically calm demeanor was replaced by something more anxious, like a cat on a hot tin roof. "Mr. Amsel," she said, her voice hushed, "there's something we need to discuss." Varric nodded, motioning for her to continue. "What's on your mind?" "It's just, some of the others are getting nervous," Clyra admitted. "They worry about what will happen if we're caught." "Understandable," Varric replied, leaning against his desk. "This isn't exactly a walk in the park, more like a sprint through a minefield." Clyra smiled, though it was tinged with worry. "But they also know we can't just do nothing." "We'll be careful," Varric assured her, though he knew careful was a relative term. "We're not just fighting for ourselves, but for everyone who can't." Clyra nodded, seeming to draw strength from his words. "Let's hope it's enough." As she left, Varric pondered the weight of their undertaking. Fear was a constant companion, lurking in the shadows, whispering doubts, but he knew that change never came without risk. The day of the test arrived with all the subtlety of a punch to the face. The academy was on high alert, guards patrolling with the enthusiasm of zealots at a witch trial. Varric stood at the head of the classroom, masking his own nerves with a veneer of dry humor. "Good morning, everyone," he began, adopting an exaggerated cheeriness that elicited a few chuckles. "Today's lesson is on adaptability. Or, as I like to call it, how to survive in a system that wants you dead." The students were tense, but there was a spark in their eyes that wasn't there before, a shared understanding that they were in this together. "Remember," Varric said more seriously, "we're not just adapting to survive, we're adapting to win. The system expects us to follow the rules. So let's give them what they expect while we plan our own play." With that, the lesson began. Varric guided them through the motions, all the while slipping in hints and strategies. The Academy's technology might have been advanced, but it had a fatal flaw. It assumed its creators were infallible. The key was in the details, using the Academy's tendency to overlook the unexpected to their advantage. They'd make small changes, subtle shifts in behavior and biology that would go unnoticed by everyone except those who knew what to look for. The day passed in a blur of whispered conversations and nervous glances. Varric's heart raced, each beat a reminder of what was at stake. But he couldn't let the fear show, not when his students looked to him for guidance. As the final bell rang, the students filed out, leaving Varric alone with his thoughts. The plan was in motion, a delicate dance that could tip either way. He could only hope it would lead them toward something better, rather than to the gallows. That evening, as he wandered the halls of Selenes, Varric couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The Academy was a living organism, pulsating with its own brand of malevolence. Every corner hid a potential threat, every corridor a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Turning a corner, he nearly collided with a Calsri guard, his presence as incongruous as a fish on land. The guard eyed him with suspicion, and Varric plastered on a grin that felt as false as Thorax's promises of reform. "Evening," Varric said, stepping aside to let the guard pass. "Busy night for a stroll," the guard grunted, the kind of response that spoke volumes without saying anything at all. Varric watched him walk away, feeling a pang of unease. The regime was tightening its grip, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it would try to crush them entirely. Returning to his quarters, Varric sank into a chair, exhaustion weighing heavy on his shoulders. The fight was just beginning, and he could only hope that their plan would hold. The next day, Varric entered the classroom to find Johnny waiting for him, an unusual seriousness in her expression. Her antennae twitched like they were signaling distress, and Varric's unease deepened. "Mr. Amsel," she began, her voice strained, "there's something you need to know." Varric raised an eyebrow, motioning for her to continue. "What is it?" Some of the students. "They are worried," Johnny admitted, glancing around the room as if expecting the walls to have ears. "They think we're taking too big a risk." "Risk is part of the game," Varric replied, though he understood their fear. "But so is the possibility of change." "I know," Johnny said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But some are talking about backing out." Varric's heart sank, though he kept his expression neutral. "Backing out now could put everyone at risk. We need to see this through." Johnny nodded, her eyes filled with a determination that belied her youth. "I'll talk to them. Remind them why we're doing this." "Thank you," Varric said, offering a reassuring smile. "We need everyone on board if we're going to pull this off." As Johnny left, Varric considered the growing tension within their group. Fear was a powerful motivator, but it could also be their undoing if not managed carefully. The day wore on, each lesson a reminder of the delicate balance they maintained. As Varric taught, he caught glimpses of the drones hovering outside the windows, their presence a constant reminder of the stakes. But even as the regime tightened its grip, Varric could see the flicker of rebellion in his students' eyes, a spark that refused to be snuffed out. As the final bell rang, Varric watched his students leave with a mix of pride and dread. They were young, idealistic, and perhaps a bit naive. But they were also determined, and that determination was their greatest weapon. In the days that followed, the Academy's measures grew increasingly draconian. The genetic monitoring expanded, and the guards patrolled with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. But Varric and his students pressed on, adapting to each new obstacle with ingenuity and grit. The fear of failure loomed large, a shadow that threatened to engulf them. But they refused to back down, their resolve a beacon in the darkness. As Varric stood at the head of the classroom, he knew they were on the brink of something monumental. The regime's hold was strong, but history had shown that even the strongest grips could be pried loose. And with every lesson, every whisper of defiance, they edged closer to a future where they could breathe free. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be without sacrifice, but it would be worth it. Because sometimes, history wasn't just about the past. It was about the future they dared to dream into existence, and Varric was determined to help write it, one lesson at a time. Varric Amsel was many things. Optimistic wasn't one of them. As he trudged through the corridors of Selenes, the oppressive atmosphere felt as thick as a politician's wallet. His mind buzzed with the plan like a wasp trapped in a jar, wings frantically beating, searching for a way out. They were going to pull off the impossible, or crash and burn spectacularly trying. "Nice day for a stroll to the gallows, eh?" Varric muttered to himself, sidestepping a janitorial drone that beeped at him with all the mechanical disdain it could muster. He was heading toward the classroom where his ragtag bunch of students waited. Only today, it wasn't the usual lesson they were dreading. Today, the lesson had to turn into a rescue briefing. Johnny was missing, and not just forgot to set her alarm missing, more like picked up by the regime's private goon squad missing. When Varric walked in, the air in the room was thick with tension. You could slice it with a butter knife, assuming the butter knife wasn't confiscated for being a potential weapon. "Morning," Varric said, trying to inject a bit of humor into his voice. It came out more like a croak. Or should I say morning of our discontent? Clyra, sitting in the front row with her usual calm demeanor, raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Amsel, I think we're all quite aware of the discontent part." "Fair enough," Varric conceded. "Let's not sugarcoat it. We're up the creek without a paddle or a boat. Johnny's been nabbed." A collective murmur swept through the students. Fear, anger, and a touch of the inevitable despair. Like the time the cafeteria served greenish meatloaf and called it mystery surprise. "Do we know where they took her?" someone from the back asked, voice shaky. Varric nodded. "Same place they take everyone they think is a troublemaker, the detention block. It's as welcoming as a porcupine in a balloon factory." "Why her?" Clyra asked. Her calm exterior belied the storm brewing underneath. Varric shrugged, palms up in a gesture of helplessness. Sometimes it's not what you've done but what they think you'll do. Call it pre-crime or just plain paranoia. The room sank into silence. Varric could almost hear their collective heartbeat, a pounding drumline of dread. He needed to rally them, but they were younger than him, less jaded, hopefully. They had a future to worry about, assuming there was a future. "So what's the plan, Mr. Amsel?" Clyra asked, her voice steely. "We can't just leave her there. And we can't just march in there, guns blazing, not unless we fancy a short career followed by a nice, long stay in the afterlife," Varric replied. A soft chuckle rippled through the room, but it died quickly. Dark humor only carried you so far when the stakes were life or death. "Look, we have to be smart about this. We need to create a diversion, something big enough to draw attention away from the detention block. Then a small group can slip in and get Johnny out. And how do you propose we create this diversion?" Clyra asked, her tone flat, like a poker player who already knew they'd lost the hand. "Leave that to me," Varric said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We'll use the drones. Reprogram them to cause a little chaos. Imagine them playing a lovely symphony of fire alarms and smoke detectors." The students exchanged glances. It was risky, more than risky. It was like trying to juggle plasma grenades with your eyes closed. But desperate times, desperate measures. "Okay, who here knows how to hack a drone?" Varric asked. A hand shot up. Tin, one of the quieter students whose aptitude for technology was rivaled only by his love of antiquated video games. "I can do it," Tin said, his voice barely a whisper but carrying a note of determination. "I've been messing with drone coding for a couple of years. Never thought it'd come in handy for this, though." "Good man," Varric said, clapping Tin on the shoulder. "Okay, let's get to work. We don't have much time." The room buzzed with activity, a barely controlled panic fueling a flurry of whispered conversations and furtive glances. It was like watching a bunch of mice planning to steal cheese from a particularly grumpy lion. As they worked, Varric found himself thinking about Johnny. Her sarcasm was almost a currency, traded in the oppressive halls of Selenes for moments of humor and humanity. She didn't deserve this. None of them did, but the universe rarely dealt in what people deserved. By the time the lesson ended, they had a plan, if you could call it that. It was more like a wish with a side of reckless abandon, but it was all they had. They dispersed with a sense of grim purpose, each student taking their part in the grand scheme. As Varric watched them go, he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He was leading them into something that could get them all killed. But what choice did they have? Sometimes fighting for what you believed in meant risking everything, and they had to believe it would be worth it. The academy felt like a beast waiting to pounce. Surveillance drones hovered and hummed overhead, their mechanical eyes scanning for the first sign of rebellion. Guards lurked in the corridors, their expressions as welcoming as a hangman at sunrise. Varric moved through the halls with a casual air that belied his racing heart. His mind buzzed with questions. What if they were too late? What if Johnny was already? No, he couldn't think like that, not now. Tin had done his part. The drones, at least a few of them, were set to malfunction spectacularly at the right moment. All that was left was to coordinate the chaos and hope it all worked out, which was a strategy that had never failed except every time it did. The clock struck the hour, and Varric felt his pulse quicken. He was stationed near a junction, pretending to review lesson plans on his data pad, a cover as flimsy as a politician's promise. Across the hall, Clyra stood against the wall, looking every bit as calm as always, but with a glint in her eyes that promised retribution. They exchanged a nod. Then it began. A shrill alarm screamed through the halls, followed by a cacophony of klaxons and flashing lights. It was as if the entire academy had decided to throw a rave and forgot to invite the students. The guards reacted with predictable confusion, milling about like ants at a picnic, unsure where to go or what to do first. It was chaos, beautiful and terrifying. Varric slipped into the shadows, making his way toward the detention block. The plan relied on speed and stealth, qualities he would have sold his soul for at that moment. Clyra and another student, Mikkel, joined him as they reached the entrance. The guard posted there had abandoned his post to join the chaos. It was a small mercy, but one they couldn't squander. They slipped inside, moving quickly through the dimly lit corridor. Cells lined the walls, each one a grim reminder of the regime's reach. "Johnny," Clyra whispered, peering into each cell as they passed. "Johnny, where are you?" Varric's heart pounded in his chest, each step echoing in the silence. They were so close, yet every second felt like a lifetime. Finally, they found her. Johnny stood behind the bars, her antennae twitching in agitation, eyes wide with disbelief. "What took you so long?" she hissed, though her relief was palpable. "Traffic," Varric replied, fumbling with the controls to unlock the door. "You know how it is." The door swung open with a creak and Johnny slipped out, joining them in the corridor. Her presence was a balm to their frayed nerves, and Varric felt a surge of hope. "All right, let's get out of here," he said, motioning for them to follow. But as they turned to leave, a shadow loomed in the doorway. A Calsry guard, his expression a study in displeasure, blocked their path. "Going somewhere," the guard growled, his voice as welcoming as a death sentence. Varric's mind raced, searching for an escape. They were so close, and now this. "Yeah, a little field trip," Varric replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Thought we'd take in the sights." The guard sneered, reaching for his weapon. It was a moment of decision, a tipping point. Varric knew they couldn't fight their way out, not without risking everything. In the blink of an eye, Clyra sprang into action. A swift kick to the guard's knees sent him stumbling, and before he could recover, they were past him, sprinting down the corridor. The alarm continued to wail, a backdrop to their desperate escape. They ran, hearts pounding, feet flying over the cold metal floor. Behind them, the guards' shouts echoed, but they didn't dare look back. There was no turning back now. The only way was forward. As they emerged into the chaos of the academy, the pandemonium served as a cover for their retreat. They moved as one, a unit forged in desperation and hope. Finally, they reached the safety of Varric's quarters, slamming the door shut behind them. Breathless, hearts racing, they allowed themselves a moment of triumph. "Nice work," Varric said, leaning against the wall trying to catch his breath. "Remind me never to play poker with you, Clyra," she shrugged, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Desperation makes for good improvisation." Johnny sank into a chair, exhaustion etched on her face. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice wavering with relief. "Yeah, well, can't go leaving our star cynic behind," Varric replied, a warmth in his voice despite the circumstances. As they settled in, the weight of their actions began to sink in. They'd done it, they'd pulled off the impossible. But the victory was bittersweet, tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. The regime would come down on them harder now, their defiance marked. But for now, they had won a small, vital victory. A glimmer of hope in the darkness. And sometimes, hope was the most valuable currency of all. Tension buzzed in the air like an overworked janitorial drone with a vendetta. Varric rubbed the back of his neck, trying to work out the kinks that had become permanent residents since the Academy decided to step up its surveillance measures. At least they had managed to get Johnny out of the detention block. For now, anyway. "You know, for a rescue mission, that went remarkably well," Johnny said, sarcasm dripping from her words like oil from a poorly maintained engine. She leaned against the wall, her antennae twitching occasionally, a testament to her nerves. "What now, fearless leader?" Varric sighed, the weight of their situation pressing down on him like an overgrown slug. "Now we figure out how not to die horribly at the hands of the regime. Suggestions." Clyra, ever the voice of reason and calm in the midst of chaos, glanced around the cramped room, her eyes landing on each of them in turn. "We need allies. More than just us, if we're going to pull off something bigger than a jailbreak." "Great idea," Varric said, with as much enthusiasm as he could muster, which admittedly wasn't much. "Unfortunately, our options are limited to students, drones, and the occasional sympathetic janitor." Johnny snorted. "Yeah, I'm sure the janitorial drones will start a revolution any day now. They're just waiting for their moment." It was Tin who spoke next, a glint of something in his eye that Varric hadn't seen before. Hope. There might be more than just janitors on our side, he said almost too casually. Varric raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what makes you think that? Tin hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with a worn-out data pad. I heard rumors. There's a network sympathetic aliens who don't like the regime any more than we do. They've been operating under the radar, keeping their heads down. And you didn't think to mention this before our little jaunt into the detention block? Johnny asked, incredulous. Tin shrugged, a sheepish grin on his face. Didn't seem relevant until we actually, did something rebellious. Well, color me intrigued, Varric said, rubbing his chin. How do we contact these potential allies? Send a message in a bottle. Although I doubt bottles work too well in the vacuum of space. Tin's grin widened. I have a contact. She's a technician in the lower levels. Goes by the name of Ilya. If anyone can help us get in touch with this network, it's her. Okay, so we have a plan. Or at least the beginning of one, Varric said, feeling the first stirrings of something that might be mistaken for optimism. Let's get moving. The longer we sit around, the higher the chance the regime figures out what we've done. The group moved with purpose, slipping through the corridors like shadows in a place that was all too eager to stamp them out. As they made their way to the lower levels, Varric couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope, with nothing but a long drop waiting for them if they slipped. When they reached the lower levels, the corridors were quieter, the surveillance drones less frequent. It was a place for the unsung heroes of the academy, the technicians, the maintenance workers, the people who kept the place running while no one else cared to notice. They found Ilya in a dimly lit corner, surrounded by an assortment of tools and gadgets that looked like they were one bad day away from mutiny. She was a wiry figure, her skin a mottled blue, eyes sharp and knowing. Tin didn't expect to see you here, she said, her voice low and wary. Who's the entourage? Friends, or at least not enemies, Tin replied, glancing at Varric. Ilya, this is Varric Amsel. He's sort of our leader. Sort of, Varric echoed. Nice to meet you, Ilya. We're hoping you can help us get in touch with this network we've heard about. Ilya studied him for a moment, her expression inscrutable. And why should I help you? This is dangerous, you know. Johnny stepped forward, her expression earnest. Because we're trying to fight back, to do something about the regime. We can't do it alone. Ilya's eyes flickered with something like sympathy. All right. I can get a message to them, but it'll take time. They're cautious and for good reason. Time's something we're running short on, Varric said. But anything you can do, we'd be grateful. Ilya nodded, already turning to a console, her fingers dancing over the controls. I'll see what I can do. Just keep your heads down in the meantime. This isn't going to be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, Varric replied, a grim smile tugging at his lips. They left Ilya to her work, retreating to the safety of the shadows. The academy felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap at any moment. They needed to stay one step ahead of the regime to find a way to tip the scales in their favor. As they regrouped, Varric couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. From a simple history lesson to plotting a rebellion, life had a funny way of throwing you into the deep end when you least expected it. Clyra looked at him, her expression thoughtful. Do you think we have a chance, Varric, against all of this? He considered her question, the weight of it pressing down on him. Honestly, I don't know, but we have to try, don't we? Because if we don't, who will? It wasn't much, but it was all they had. A sliver of hope in a galaxy that seemed determined to snuff it out. For now, it would have to be enough. Asterisk days passed, each one a test of patience and resolve. The academy continued its routine, unaware, or at least pretending to be, of the storm brewing beneath its surface. Varric and his small band of rebels lay low, biding their time, waiting for news from Ilya. They couldn't afford to tip their hand too soon, not when the regime's eyes seemed to be everywhere. Finally, a message came through. Ilya had made contact. The network was willing to meet, to discuss what they could do together. The chosen meeting place was a maintenance tunnel, far from the prying eyes of the academy's surveillance. It was a place of rust and shadows, where the sounds of the upper levels were muffled and distant. Varric led the group, his heart a drumbeat of anticipation and fear. They were venturing into the unknown, stepping onto a path that could lead to freedom or disaster. As they entered the tunnel, shapes emerged from the darkness. Aliens of various species, their faces a patchwork of hope and caution. These were beings who had seen the worst the regime had to offer and lived to tell the tale. A tall figure stepped forward, her skin a deep shade of red, eyes like polished obsidian. "You must be Varric," she said, her voice carrying a melodic lilt that belied the gravity of the situation. "I am Nezra." "Nezra," Varric echoed, nodding in greeting. "I suppose you know why we're here." "Indeed. You've caused quite a stir at the Academy. Word travels fast among those who are tired of living in shadows." "Not sure if that's a compliment or a warning," Varric said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Nezra chuckled softly. "Perhaps a bit of both." She gestured around her. "We are the Alliance. We exist to disrupt the regime, to give hope to those who have none." "And how do we fit into all of this?" Clyra asked, her tone direct and curious. "You are a symbol," Nezra replied. "Proof that resistance can come from anywhere, even within the heart of the regime itself. We can help each other." Johnny crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "And what's the catch?" "There's always a catch." Nezra's gaze met hers, unflinching. "The catch is that we risk everything, but in doing so we stand a chance of winning something greater." Varric nodded, understanding the weight of her words. They were all in this together, bound by a common cause. It wasn't just about the Academy anymore. It was about something greater, something worth fighting for. "So what's the plan?" Tin asked, his voice barely concealing his eagerness. Nezra smiled, a fierce and determined expression. "We coordinate our efforts, hit the regime from all sides, destabilize their operations. It won't be easy, but with your help we can make it happen." A spark of hope ignited within Varric, a fire that had been smoldering for far too long. They had allies, a chance to make a difference. For the first time, the odds didn't seem quite so insurmountable. "All right," Varric said, his voice firm and resolute. "Let's do this, for Johnny, for all of us." And so began their new alliance, a coalition of the willing and the desperate. It was a gamble, a roll of the cosmic dice. But sometimes you had to embrace the chaos and hope that fortune favored the bold. As they left the tunnel, Varric felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just a ragtag group of students. They were part of something bigger, a force to be reckoned with. The regime wouldn't know what hit them. In the cold light of the Academy, Varric Amsel allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. They had allies, a plan, and a cause worth fighting for. It was more than he dared hope for. And sometimes, hope was the most dangerous weapon of all. Varric Amsel sometimes wondered if he'd missed his calling as a circus performer. The way he was juggling stress, secrets, and the occasional existential crisis, surely he could have wowed the crowd under the big top. Instead, here he was leading a rebellion in a place where hope was as rare as an honest politician. The Academy had settled into its usual oppressive rhythm, the surveillance drones buzzing like mechanical hornets ready to sting at the first sign of dissent. But Varric knew the routine masked a growing tension, one that he and his motley crew were about to exploit. "All right, listen up," Varric said, huddled with his group in a forgotten maintenance closet that smelled like desperation and bad decisions. "We've got one shot at this, so let's not screw it up. I'd like to think we're not the cast of some tragic play." Johnny and Tenny, twitching with sarcasm, piped up. "Great. So we're the comic relief in a rebellion. Someone should tell my career counselor." "Focus, Johnny," Varric sighed, though a small grin tugged at his lips. "We've got the Alliance on our side now, and if we time it right, we can hit the regime where it hurts." "Which is where exactly?" Tin asked, more out of genuine curiosity than doubt. "Do they even have a soft underbelly?" "Every beast does," Varric replied, a dark gleam in his eyes. "We just have to find it and poke it with a stick. Or a very large metaphorical sword." Clyra, ever the voice of reason, crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. "And you're sure the Alliance will hold up their end? They want the regime gone as much as we do," Varric assured her. We take out the command center, disrupt their communications, and the whole house of cards should come tumbling down. And if it doesn't? Johnny asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. Then we improvise, Varric said, shrugging like he was discussing lunch options instead of the potential end of their lives. We're good at that, right? The plan was as simple as it was insane. Coordinate with the Alliance to create chaos, seize control of key locations, and bring the Academy's oppressive machinery to a grinding halt. A tall order, but Varric had learned that sometimes the best strategy was to throw everything at the wall and see what stuck. The night of the uprising arrived with a chill in the air and an unsettling calm. Varric's group moved with a cautious precision that felt almost professional, their footsteps silent against the cold metal floors as they made their way to the command center. The corridors were eerily empty, an unsettling reminder that the real threat wasn't the usual foot traffic but the omnipresent eyes of the regime. Varric glanced at Johnny, who had taken point, her antennae twitching in anticipation. "You know, this would be a lot easier if we had a map," she whispered, her voice low enough to avoid detection. "Yeah, well, next time we'll bring a GPS," Varric replied dryly. "Or maybe ask for directions at the front desk." They reached the heavily reinforced door of the command center, where a cavalry guard was stationed. The guard's expression was as welcoming as a tax audit. Varric motioned to Tin, who was fiddling with a device that looked suspiciously like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and wishful thinking. "Think you can get us in?" Varric asked. Tin grinned, a gleam of mischief in his eyes. "If I can't, we'll just tell them we're here for the open mic night." The device in Tin's hand whirred to life, unleashing a series of beeps and clicks that wouldn't have sounded out of place in an old sci-fi flick. The guard, clearly not paid enough to deal with this kind of nonsense, stepped forward with a sneer. "Hey, you can't be here," he barked, reaching for his weapon. "Relax, friend," Johnny said, stepping forward with a disarming smile. "We're just here to fix the plumbing." The guard echoed, confusion painting his features. "Yeah, you know, gotta keep the pipes clear," Johnny replied, antennae twitching with mock concern. "Otherwise the whole place stinks to high heaven." The guard hesitated, and that was all the opening Varric needed. He lunged, delivering a swift punch that sent the guard crumpling to the floor in an undignified heap. "Well, that was a productive discussion," Clyra noted, raising an eyebrow. Tin's device finally worked its magic, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the command center was a maze of blinking lights and holographic displays, a testament to the regime's obsession with control. And there, in the midst of it all, were the control drones that kept the Academy under constant watch. "All right, let's make some noise," Varric said, moving to the nearest console and starting to hack into the system with a confidence that belied his lack of qualifications. Johnny and Clyra took positions on either side of him, eyes scanning for any incoming threats while Tin busied himself with rerouting power from the drones. The room was filled with the hum of technology, a sound that was abruptly shattered by the blaring alarms. Varric's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his focus on the task at hand. "We've got company," Clyra warned, glancing at the monitors showing guards converging on their location. "Perfect. Just what we needed," Johnny quipped, her sarcasm cutting through the tension like a knife. "What now, fearless leader? Now we hold the line," Varric replied, determination hardening his voice. "Tin, how's that power reroute coming?" "Almost there," Tin grunted, fingers flying over the controls like a man possessed. Outside the command center, the sounds of the approaching guards were growing louder, their footsteps a steady drumbeat of impending doom. Varric's mind raced, searching for a way to buy them more time. "Johnny, Clyra, keep them busy," Varric ordered. The two nodded, taking up defensive positions as the first of the guards burst through the door in a hail of blaster fire. The air was filled with the acrid scent of ozone and the sharp crack of energy bolts, each shot a reminder of how close they were to failure. Then, as if on cue, the lights flickered and the drones powered down, their surveillance capabilities rendered useless by Tin's handiwork. "Got it." Tin shouted triumphantly. "We've disabled their eyes and ears." "Great timing," Varric said, relief washing over him. "Let's get out of here before they realize what we've done." They retreated, leaving chaos in their wake as the Academy's security scrambled to make sense of the blackout. The plan was working, the regime's chokehold loosening with every passing moment. As they made their way through the corridors, Varric couldn't help but feel a swell of pride for his team. They'd pulled off the impossible, outsmarting an enemy that had underestimated them at every turn. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits," Johnny said, echoing his thoughts. "We're not done yet," Varric reminded her, though he couldn't keep the grin off his face. The real challenge lay ahead, in coordinating with the Alliance to strike the final blow. But for now, they'd won a critical victory, one that had tipped the scales in their favor. Varric led them to a rendezvous point where Nezra and her Alliance comrades awaited, their expressions a mix of anticipation and hope. "It's done," Varric announced, his voice carrying a note of triumph. "The regime's blind and deaf. It's time to move." Nezra nodded, her eyes gleaming with approval. "You've done well, Varric. Now we strike while they're reeling." The Alliance moved with practiced efficiency, their ranks swelling with students and staff emboldened by the success of Varric's group. They spread through the Academy like wildfire, each step bringing them closer to dismantling the regime's oppressive hold. The final confrontation was a blur of action and adrenaline, the culmination of everything they'd fought for. Varric found himself in the heart of the struggle, surrounded by allies and enemies alike. The air was thick with the sounds of battle, a cacophony of shouts and blaster fire that filled the corridors. He ducked and weaved, his mind focused on the task at hand: take out the remaining command posts and ensure the regime's defeat. All around him, the Academy was a war zone, a testament to their desperate bid for freedom. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The regime's forces were routed, their command structure shattered by the coordinated assault. Varric stood amidst the aftermath, his chest heaving with exertion and relief. "We did it," Johnny said, appearing at his side with a grin that could have lit up the stars. "We actually did it. Don't sound so surprised," Varric replied, though he couldn't deny the amazement in his own voice. "We had a good plan and great people." Clyra joined them, her usual calm tinged with excitement. "The Academy's yours." "For now, at least." "Yeah," Varric said, allowing himself a moment to savor the victory. For now. There was still work to be done, a galaxy to rebuild from the ruins of oppression. But here, in the heart of the Academy that had once been a symbol of their subjugation, they'd taken the first steps toward a brighter future. "I guess we'll have to find a new hobby," Tin joked, his eyes sparkling with the thrill of victory. "Well, I hear the circus is always hiring," Varric quipped, a laugh escaping him. As they stood together, the weight of their achievement settling in, Varric felt a sense of camaraderie that went beyond words. They'd come together against impossible odds, and in doing so they'd proven that hope was not just a weapon, it was a promise. And sometimes, promises were the most powerful force in the universe. Varric Amsel leaned against the charred remnants of the Academy's once imposing entrance, sucking in the acrid scent of burnt circuitry and rebellion. The building was still standing, more or less. A bit singed around the edges, like a forgotten toaster pastry, but still there. Unlike the regime's grip on the colony, which had been flambéed to a crisp. "Nice work," Johnny piped up, her antennae bobbing with each word. "You've turned this place into a real fixer-upper." "Yeah, I'm thinking of flipping it," Varric replied, brushing dust off his shoulders. Revolution chic is all the rage. Around them, the Academy buzzed with the frantic energy of rebuilding. Students, staff, and assorted rebels scurried like ants through the rubble, each one clutching tools, makeshift repair kits, or occasionally a snack. You had to keep your strength up when toppling a government, after all, who knew education would be the key to freedom. Clyra mused, joining them with a knowing smirk. "Maybe you should start offering a master class. Lesson 1, How Not to Die," Varric quipped. Lesson 2, Why Duct Tape is Your Best Friend, Principal Thorax approached, looking a bit more ruffled than his usual self. His fob dangled uselessly from his hand, like a toy no one wanted to play with anymore. "I suppose congratulations are in order," he growled reluctantly. "Aw, Thorax, you're making me blush," Varric said, grinning. "You sure know how to make a guy feel loved," Thorax huffed, antennae twitching in annoyance. "The regime underestimated you humans." "You're annoyingly resourceful." It was as close to a compliment as the old principal ever got. "Thanks, we try our best," Varric replied, giving a mock salute. "Now do us a favor and don't forget to mention that in your resignation letter." The principal's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, realizing the futility of resistance. His regime-backed authority was deader than a dodo in a black hole. Meanwhile, Tin was busy in what was left of the tech lab, surrounded by a tangle of wires and screens. His fingers danced over a console, making the once-dreaded surveillance drones perform a less-than-coordinated ballet. "I've always wanted to direct a show," he said, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Tonight's performance, The Death of Tyranny," catchy title, Johnny remarked, peering over his shoulder. "Could use more explosions, though. Being subtle's not really your thing, is it?" Tin shot back, a lopsided grin on his face. "Subtlety is for people who aren't interesting," Johnny retorted, flicking his ear. Varric watched them bicker, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the recent fires. It wasn't just the academy that was being rebuilt. It was something bigger, something messier and much more human. As the dust settled and the celebration, spontaneous and somewhat booze-fueled, began, Varric took a moment to reflect. It was a rare luxury, introspection. Usually he was too busy trying not to get shot. Rebellion had never been part of the plan when he'd taken the teaching job. But life, like a bad joke, had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected it. And now here they were, unlikely heroes in a story that would be told for generations, or at least until next Thursday. "Thinking deep thoughts, boss?" Clyra asked, sidling up beside him. "Trying not to," Varric replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hurts my brain," Clyra chuckled. "Whatever you did, it worked. This place isn't perfect, but it's ours, yeah. And let's keep it that way," Varric said, determination setting his jaw. "We've got a lot to fix." As night fell, casting long shadows across the lunar landscape, Varric gathered his ragtag group for one last briefing. No blaring alarms, no guards, just the quiet hum of hope, an unfamiliar sound that was quickly becoming his favorite. "All right, listen up," he began, his voice carrying an edge of authority. "We've got a chance to make something good out of this mess. The Alliance is backing us, but it's our mess to clean." Johnny raised an eyebrow, her skepticism tempered with curiosity. "And what's the plan, oh fearless leader?" Step 1. No more surveillance drones. "Tin's already working on that," Varric said, nodding in Tin's direction. "Step 2. Education for everyone. We're going to teach history without the brainwashing." "Step 3. Make sure we don't screw this up again," he finished, looking at each of them in turn. "We've got a shot at something better, and I don't plan on wasting it." There was a moment of silence as the weight of his words settled over them. Then Johnny broke it with a snort. "Very noble, Varric. But can we at least get a day off first?" The group laughed, and Varric joined in, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The road ahead was long and full of pitfalls and potential faceplants. But for now, they were together, and that was enough. As the night wore on, Varric wandered through the hastily constructed camp. He passed makeshift tents, where laughter and the occasional snore echoed through the moonlit air. It wasn't much, but it was home, at least for now. He paused near the edge of the camp, staring out at the horizon where the distant glow of the colony flickered like a solitary star in the night. It was a reminder of both their triumph and the challenges yet to come. "You did good today." Clyra's voice cut through the quiet, startling him. "Don't sneak up on me like that," Varric said, clutching his chest dramatically. "Can't help it. Ninja training," she deadpanned, falling into step beside him. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Clyra broke the silence. "Seriously, Varric, you've given them hope. That's a rare gift," he shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Hope's cheap. Keeping it alive, that's the hard part. "Then it's a good thing you're as stubborn as an Arcturan mule," she replied with a grin. "Stubbornness is just another word for being right," Varric shot back, earning a laugh from Clyra. They lingered there a while longer, watching as the colony breathed and pulsed with life, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who refuse to be crushed under the weight of oppression. The dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was a new day, and with it came the promise of tomorrow. Varric turned to head back to camp, his mind already racing with plans for the future. There was much to do, but for the first time they were in control of their own destiny. As the first rays of sunlight bathed the camp in a warm glow, Varric felt a sense of peace settle over him. They had won a battle, but the war for freedom was far from over. With a deep breath, he rejoined the others, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with the same irreverent spirit and tenacity that had carried them this far. "All right, folks, let's get to work," he called out, clapping his hands to get their attention. "We've got a colony to rebuild and a regime to keep in check." The group responded with a chorus of eager agreement, their energy infectious and unyielding. As they set to work, Varric couldn't help but smile. They were a motley crew, a band of misfits united by a common goal, and together they would reshape the future, one step at a time. "Hey, Varric," Johnny shouted from somewhere within the crowd. "What's the first order of business for our brand new colony?" "First, we fix the plumbing," he called back, earning a round of laughter. And with that they embarked on the next chapter of their journey, driven by the knowledge that they were the architects of their own fate. It wasn't going to be easy, but then again, nothing worth doing ever was. In the end, it was the little things that made all the difference, the shared laughter, the camaraderie, the triumphs, and the setbacks. It was these moments that defined them, shaping their legacy for generations to come. And as they toiled under the rising sun, they knew that whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together, with grit, determination, and just a touch of irreverent humor. After all, that's what it meant to be human. In the vast, uncaring expanse of the universe, they had carved out a space of their own. And for Varric Amsel and his motley crew, that was more than enough.